Colorado is making national headlines this morning by keeping former President Donald Trump off the primary ballot. That came down in a state Supreme Court ruling late Wednesday.
Our legal analyst Whitney Traylor with us now to walk us through this. This is a big deal. Whitney, thank you for being with us this morning.
Sure, it's good to be here.
So first and foremost, how did the state Supreme Court reach this decision?
Well, the state Supreme Court essentially agreed with the lower court on so many different things, but there were a couple major things that they disagreed with. So what the lower court was looking at was a few things. Does this Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, the disqualification clause, does it apply to the president? And then 2, was there an insurrection, and did President Trump at the time engage in it? And the lower court said, yes, he engaged in insurrection, but it didn't apply to presidents. So here the Supreme Court essentially reversed that part and said, no, this does apply to the office of president. He therefore did engage in insurrection, therefore it's appropriate to keep him off the ballot.
So what happens from here? I mean, the order is pending now, an appeal from the Supreme Court.
Yes.
So what does that mean?
Right, it's a good question, and I read the decision this morning, so I did read that section as it relates to a stay, and what they said was, they said, look, we're gonna leave it as status quo, so that means his name can be on the ballot. So they're saying it shouldn't be, but we're gonna put a stay until January 4th. And they're saying if the Supreme Court then takes the case, then that stay will continue. So he will be on the ballot. Okay. But if the Supreme Court doesn't take the case, the stay expires on January 4th, which means the next day, January 5th, when it goes to print, his name will be off the ballot. So to simplify it, if the Trump team appeals, then his name will probably be on the ballot. If they don't appeal, then it won't be.
Okay, interesting. How could this ruling impact similar cases in other states?
Right, so this is what we call, you have binding precedent or persuasive precedent in the court. So this case is really a beautiful thing. I know that a lot of people are really uptight about it, and it's very polarized politically and otherwise, but this is how we shape our law. We have a common law system, so it's judge-made law. It's based on stare decisis, based on precedent. We don't have precedent in this case. Now, is this going to be the only time that there's a president or a presidential candidate who may kind of lead something like this, what the courts have deemed an insurrection? Probably not. So now we're developing our body of law. And so what the Colorado Supreme Court did, that will just be binding on Colorado. Other states don't have to follow it. That's why it's not binding authority, it's persuasive. But this is a reason why the Supreme Court might accept writ, because you have all these different states ruling in different ways. So if the Supreme Court says, we're going to hear this case, they'll resolve it for the rest of the country.
Okay. So what's the timing on everything? How does that all play out? I mean, because that January 4th, January 5th that you talked about is right around the corner.
Yeah.
That's right around the corner. So presumably if the Trump team is going to file its appeal, they would file its petition and its writ right away. And then we would have to see what the Supreme Court did. Normally it wouldn't move that quickly, but under these circumstances, the Supreme Court may move especially quick. But here's what's really interesting, because if the Supreme Court accepts this case, now you have they're looking already at the Jack Smith case and whether a former president can be criminally prosecuted. So they'll be accepting that issue. And now if they accept this with respect to whether or not he can be on the ballot or not, the Supreme Court will have a fundamental impact on the 2024 election.
Wow, we'll have to see how it all shakes out, Whitney. That's a lot, but thank you for breaking that down. It's really interesting.
I know, I was going fast, but there's so much to it that I was trying to get as much in as we could.
You did a great job.
Sure, we're going to talk about it a little bit more in the next couple of weeks. As
sure.
always, thanks for coming in.